We continue now at the top of Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 63b. The Gemara continues with a statement of Rava. Rava says, now that Rabbi Yanai said, Mali Hain, Mali Demeyan Amrinon, that we say, Mali Hain, Mali Demeyan, meaning to say, again, let's say a person buys wheat at the current market price. Now it's time to collect the wheat. The wheat is already worth more. So Rabbi Yanai says he doesn't have to get the wheat from the seller. If the seller wants, the seller can give the value of the wheat, because Mali Hain, Mali Demeyan, what's the difference if he gives the actual product? What's the difference if he gives the value of the product? So once we say that, we say the reverse as well. Mali Demeyan or Mali Hain, Nami Amrinon, we say what's the difference if it's the value, what's the difference if it's them, meaning we say it in reverse. And the point over here is, Uposkin al sharsha b'shuk, and therefore you'd be allowed to give money according to today's market price, v'afal pi she'ein lo, even though the seller doesn't have the actual product. This is really something we said before. We'll see Rashi in a moment on that. But the point is, he's saying, Mali Demei and Mali Hain, in this situation, what's the difference? Even if you're going to give money and the actual product is not available, but since he's giving the money right now, in theory, that's the market price. The person could use the money to buy the product itself, so therefore it's not going to be a problem. Rashi explains, Mali Demehen, Mali Hain, Nami Amrin, and what's the difference if it's the value? What's the difference if it's the item itself? What this means is as follows. Betchilas hatanai nami, meaning in the beginning of the condition as well. Meaning if a person is coming along and buying a product, mishayotza ashara, and the market price is already publicized, posek imo, he can make the arrangement with him according to that market price, v'afa b'shein peiros biyado, even though the seller doesn't have the actual produce in his possession, uvilvad sheyitein lo zemos, as long as this person, the buyer, gives him actual money. Again, that's a distinction we made in the previous Amud. Just like if you had a situation where the value of the money was in his possession. Now what that means to say is, what's the value of the money? In this case it means, let's say he had the actual peiros. If the seller had the produce, v'hainu ha-peiros, if the seller had the produce, have a mutter, then of course we say that's a case of yeshlo, that's mutter. So that's what it means to say, just like that is mutter, that's mali demehen. In this case, demehen doesn't mean the money, it means the value of the money, which is the produce. Hachanami. So here also, ki have hamos biyado, if the money is in his hands, meaning the buyer is giving actual money to the seller, mutter, it's mutter. Shahamos u'demeyan shavin, because of the money and the value of the money is identical. Demali tovim hayu hachitin shem damim lamos halolo biyado me'achshav shem atzum biyado. What's the difference if it's the actual wheat that's in his possession or the money, which is the value, the exchange of the wheat? That should be the same thing. Afu yachol likach ben peiros, he can use the money to buy the produce. Umin hatam hazen, is for this reason, poskin al smach shar b'shuk, that you're allowed to arrange a purchase according to today's market price. V'ushar hayotze al yidei chamorin hamevian tvua l'shuk b'krachim. What that means is it's the market price that is derived through the donkey drivers, because they bring the product, they bring the crops to the marketplace in the cities. V'afal pisha in peiros lazeh, even though this person doesn't have actual produce, again, you're allowed to do this. You're allowed, the buyer can give the money according to today's market price, and he'll collect the produce throughout the year. That is not going to be a problem. Now Rashi says, V'im Tomer, you can ask on this. This is a statement of Rava over here, which is an Amora. He's deriving this from Rabbi Yanai, but we've said this earlier already. V'im Tomer, if you're going to say, Mishnah Seinu Hizu, this is a Mishnah, we quoted this earlier. It was quoted earlier as a Brisa, but they changed the text. They say it refers to the Mishnah later on. The Mishnah says, Yotza Hashar, poskin, that once the market price goes out, so you're allowed to make such an arrangement. So Rashi says you wouldn't necessarily know from the Mishnah. There's another way to interpret the Mishnah. Equal a mandamar lekamon. There is a mandamar later on, ein poskin al sharsha b'shuk, that says no, you're actually not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to pay money according to today's market price to collect later, because again it might go up in value. Umuki lemasnisan b'achalbi v'arbi. And so, according to that mandamar who says ein poskin al sharsha b'shuk, it says the Mishnah is not talking about a normal situation of sharsha b'shuk. It's talking about achalbi v'arbi. The masnisan lav sharsha b'shuk tanan. It doesn't say anything about the marketplace. It doesn't say the value or the price of the marketplace. That's not what it says in the Mishnah. Elayotza ashar stam. It just says that there was a general market price that went out. And what Rashi here is referring to is, again, the Gemara later on says the Mishnah might be talking about achalbi v'arbi, which means the wheat that's from the warehouses and comes in the ships in large quantities. That kind of market rate lasts longer, so that might be an exception. That might be what the Mishnah is talking about. But maybe, again, you're not allowed to be posek al sharsha b'shuk, and so therefore Rava really is saying a chiddush, since there's an alternate interpretation of the Mishnah later on. It's not 100% clear from the Mishnah later on, and therefore Rava is deriving that from Rabbi Yanai. And Rashi continues and notes, the reason why the Gemara here is able to reverse the usage of the language, because the way the Gemara phrases it is, what's the difference if it's their value, what's the difference if it's them, and the value over here actually refers to the wheat itself, which is the value of the money. So it's like we're using the term demehen backwards. We're not saying demehen means the money here, we're saying demehen means the wheat. The reason why that's possible is mishum de b'shas piron, because at the time of payment, meaning let's say you have a situation where a person gives money, and now he's being paid, instead of getting the wheat which he paid for, he's going to be getting money back. That's what it means, shas piron. So have hamos shemeshalim lo demei haperos. So then the money is considered the value of the produce, because he was supposed to get produce, he was supposed to get a certain amount of wheat, and instead he's getting the value of that wheat. So then you would use that language of what's the difference them, what's the difference of their value, meaning to say in terms of what's the difference if you get the wheat or the money. Just like you could give the wheat, you could give the value of the wheat, you could give the money. That's when we're talking about the moment of piron, when the person is paying what he owes. He owes a certain amount of wheat, instead he's giving money. However, uveshasa pisak, at the time when you're initially giving the money, meaning when the buyer is giving the money to the seller, that's when you're setting up the terms of the purchase according to the market price. Nosen lo zemos lekabel chitin. So now he's giving money in order to receive wheat, bidemei hamos, for the money, and so therefore it reverses. Umikro haperos demei and shalmos. So the peros, the produce, it becomes referred to as the value of the money. V'shayach lememar. So then you reverse the statements. Matov demei and shalmos mehain. What's the difference? The value of the money, meaning the produce itself, from money. Kihechi de demein sharo, just like it's permitted to give the produce. Hayu aperos biyado, if the produce was in his possession. Hein nami kihavu hein biyado sharu shari. So too when meaning when the money is in his possession, that also makes it okay, even if it's again ein lo, if he doesn't have the actual produce. And Rashi summarizes kitzro shel davar, in short, lashon hafsaka nimshach etzalokech. The word hafsaka is going on the buyer. When the buyer gives the money, that's called hafsaka. And again, when the buyer gives the money, that's sort of like lending the money if it would be a loan. So that's called hafsaka. Lashon hapiron, the language of piron, which is payment, nimshach achar hamocher, that goes on the seller, meaning when the seller is following through and actually giving the product to the buyer. Gabe tanai rishon posek v'nosen lo damim. So by the initial condition, the buyer gives money to the seller, lakavel kenegdan chitin, in order to get wheat for the money he's giving. Hilkach hachitin kruyim damim. That's why the wheat is referred to as the damim, etzel lokeach demei ma'osav, because in reference to the buyer, it's the value of his money. V'gabe piron, and then at the moment of payment, when the seller is following through, hamos shazeh porei havi demei hachitin shazeh chayiv lo. So the money he's giving, the money that he's paying, is the value of the wheat, which he's obligated. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yoshua l'Rava. Rav Papa and Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yoshua, they asked Rava the following question. This is from the Tana Devei Rabbi Oshia in the previous Amud. It said over there, Kulam, that in all of these cases, with all of these situations where he's converting it to a different product, Im yesh lo mutter, if the seller has that product, it's mutter. Im mein lo aser, but if he doesn't have that product, that's aser. That seems to go against what Rava says, that he does not have to have the product. And Rava answers very simply, Amar Luhu, he says to them, Hasam halvo, over there it's a loan. In that case over there in the Tana of Rabbi Oshia, he's not actually giving money. Instead, he was owed money, and he's saying, I'm owed money, or I'm owed a particular product. Instead, let's convert that to something else that you're going to owe me. So there, since money is not actually given, that's why the seller has to have the actual product. But over here, Zavine, over here, we're talking about a purchase, meaning he's giving actual money to the seller. When he's giving actual money to the seller, so then it's okay, even if the seller does not have the product, as we said. And the Gemara continues, Rabba v'Rav Yosef the Amri Tarvayu, Rabba and Rav Yosef, they both say, My taima omnu Rabbanan. Why do the Rabbanan say, Posken al sharsha b'shuk, that you're allowed to arrange a purchase according to the market price, v'yafal pisha ein lo, even though the seller does not have the product? The Amar le, because he can say to him, Shkila tivusech, throw away your favor, I don't need your favor, v'shad yachizrei, and throw your favor upon the thorns, meaning I don't need your favor. Maya honestly, because what benefit are you giving me? If I have the money in my hands, I can go to Hini and Shili, which were locations where you can buy cheaper, and so therefore, the fact that I'm giving you the money at the current market price and you're going to deliver me the product throughout the year, it's not really much benefit to me, because I can go purchase the product myself, and so that's why it's going to be permitted. And so the Gemara continues, Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef. So Abai said to Rav Yosef, Elameata, according to that logic, mutter lelavo saw b'saw, there should be no problem lending one saw for one saw. Let's say a person lends another person a saw of wheat on the condition to be paid back a saw of wheat. That's problematic, because if the wheat goes up in value, so then it's kind of like interest, but it shouldn't be an issue, because again, what's the benefit? Mishum dematzi amar le, it should be mutter, because he can say to him, Shkila tivusech v'shad yachizre, take the favor you're doing for me, throw it upon the thorns. So therefore you're doing me no favor by me lending you the wheat and then you paying me back wheat. I could just keep the wheat in my own storehouse, because he can say to him, is the wheat going to burn in my storehouse? I could have just kept the wheat all along, and therefore you're not doing me any favors by me lending you the wheat and then you're giving me back the exact same amount of wheat. I could have kept it. And so in that case also it should be mutter according to that logic. And the Gemara says, Amar Lei said back to him, Hasam halva hachazvini. Over there, we're talking about a loan. So already if you're lending a saw of wheat for a saw of wheat, and the wheat goes up in value and it's a loan situation, that already looks to be like interest. However, if you're talking about a sale, where a person is giving money at a certain price for wheat, and then the wheat might go up in value, since it's done as a sale, as a transaction, therefore it's not a problem of ribbis. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Adabar Abba Rava. Adabar Abba said to Rava, what do you mean that there's no benefit? There is a benefit, because if he would go, let's say he would go somewhere to buy the wheat himself right now at today's market price, so he's saying it's no benefit that I'm buying it from you at that price, I can go buy the wheat myself. It's not true, because he would have to give money to the broker. There's an extra zuz that you give to the broker when you buy the wheat yourself, and so he's saving that by buying it now and saying the person should supply it to him throughout the year. And so the Gemara says, Amar Lei said back to him, the Kol Yoav Leinam, the case over here is he is giving that amount of money. He's giving that zuz as a broker's fee to this individual as well, so he's not gaining anything. Rav Ashi says, Zuzi de inchi inu avdi le safsiruse. The fact that a person has money takes care of the broker's fee, meaning a person who has money to buy, he's able to buy without paying the broker's fee. There is really no such fee that he is saving on. And Rashi explains, the person can say, you're not doing me any favors, hini v'shili, because I could just take my money to hini and shili. Mekomos hein shayusmuchin lepumbedisa. These were locations near Pumbedisa. Shayu Rava Rav Yosef Yoshvin ba. That's where Rav and Rav Yosef were. Kolomar b'chol makom humotzi svivosa b'dam halal. Meaning I could take this money anywhere and really buy the same product. So therefore, you're not doing me any favors. That's why it's not a problem of ribbis when he gives the money at today's market price to be supplied throughout the year. Chiti dekadchi be'achal boy. Is the wheat going to burn in my storehouses? Bitmi, it's being asked like a wonder. Let's say I put my wheat into my storehouses, in my warehouse. Would it rain upon them? That they would be ruined. The other way to understand the word dekadchi is it's like a fire. That's the way we translated it in the Gemara. But then the Gemara says, no, isn't there a benefit? Because you would have had to pay money, you would have had to pay a zuz to the broker. How can we say that there's no benefit by paying the current market price for the wheat? But there is a benefit. Because you would have to pay a zuz to the broker, because you generally use a broker to find the people who are selling the wheat. So by giving the money early, he's saving that money. The Gemara then answered, that's true. He does have to give that extra zuz. He has to give that broker's fee. Rav Ashi says, Lo tzarech zuzi. He doesn't need to. De'inish avdi lo tzarech. It's not needed to give the broker's fee. Zuzi de'inish avdi le safsirus. Meaning the money that a person has, that takes care of the fee. Hachamor hochen etzel bal hamos. Lo tzvu. Meaning people find out if someone has money, and the donkey drivers will just go to the person with money in order to bring the grain. You don't really need that middleman. You don't need the broker, and you don't need to pay the broker's fee. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Rabba v'Rav Yosef da Amri Tarvayu. Rabba and Rav Yosef, they both say, Haiman de Yoev Zuzei Atara Charifa. If somebody gives money on the advance price, meaning to say this is before the general market price has come out, Tzarech le'as chazuye levei dari. So he has to show up, he has to be seen by the threshing floor. And the Gemara says, Lamai, for what reason does he have to go to the threshing floor? Ilamikn, if it's in order to make the kinyan halokani, but just showing up at the threshing floor, that doesn't create a kinyan. And ila kibule ala mishapara, if you're going to say it's in order to accept the curse of mishapara for somebody who goes back on his transaction, meaning he has to show up in order that he's essentially committing to the wheat which he's buying. Kilo mischazinami mekabel ala mishapara. But even if he doesn't show up, there's a mishapara. He's already given the money, and so therefore he has to follow through on the transaction. transaction. And the Gemara says, Liolam lekbuli ala mishapara. Really, we are talking where he's accepting upon himself the curse of the mishapara. But somebody who gives money on the advance price, he actually gives to 2 or 3 sellers. The idea is he wants to ensure that he's going to have a profit. So if he shows up at the person's threshing floor, so then the seller will rely on him, and therefore there's going to be a mishapara. But if he does not show up at the person's threshing floor, so then the seller says to him, Amina dashkachet piri deshapiri mididi. I said to myself that you must have found produce that's better than mine, v'shakalt, and therefore you took that, and so therefore there's no mishapara unless he shows up at the threshing floor. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravashi says, Hashta da'amrit mishum mismach daita. Now that you're saying the reason why he has to show himself at the granary is because of the fact that the person wants to rely on the fact that he's really going to buy it, afilu ashkeche beshuka, even if he finds the seller in the marketplace, v'yamar and he tells him, I'm going to follow through on the transaction, samcha daita, even that's enough that the seller can now rely on the buyer, and there would be a mishapara. And Rashi explains, Haiman de Yoiv Zuze Atara Charifa. Again, a person gives money on the advanced market price. Haposek ala peros ad shelo yotza hashar habor. What that means is the person, he gives money, assuming a price, before the actual shar habor, which is the clear market price, before that's publicized. Ela shar habachir. This is like the earlier market price that comes out. Shusamach lekatzir. It's near the time of the harvest. Shalakutos mochrin bezul. At this point in time, those who collect, they sell cheaper. Zeh sav zeh sasai. This one sells 1 saw, this one sells 2. And so it says in the Mishnah that if the person has the grain, he's able to set a price at this point in time, even though the public market price hasn't been released yet. It says that if he's first in terms of the people harvesting their grain, so then even al hagadish, even on these piles of grain, he's able to set a price for him in advance. And Rashi continues, so in this situation, when the lokeach gives the money at this advanced price, the lokeach has to show up at the granary, meaning the granary shal mochri, has to show up at the granary of the seller, keshudash v'zoret v'uaso. This is at the time that the seller is threshing his grain, begoren, in the granary. And the reason why it says over here that it's the advance market price, shein poskin olav elamishi yesh lo goren. This only applies, you're only allowed to use the tara charifa somebody who actually has a granary. The ilu shar habar poskin aflamisha eino. Because when it comes to the Shar Habor, which is the general market price, once that is publicized, so then you can arrange a sale even for somebody who does not have a granary. Lamayan, so then the Gemara said, for what purpose is he showing up at the granary? Why does he have to appear at the granary, at the threshing floor? Or if the reason is because he wants to make an actual kinyan that the seller is not able to retract, that's not a kinyan. Just showing up does not create a kinyan. You have to do mashicha, you have to actually pull the produce. And if you're going to say it's in order that the seller should have a mishapara, or if he tries to retract, in other words, you can't finalize the sale, but at least you have a commitment from the seller to follow through. That's why he has to show up at the granary. So then the Gemara eventually said that if he shows up, so then samcha daite, then he relies on it, because again, the person will usually arrange with more than one seller. Each person is going to rely once he sees the person shows up. He realizes he's relying on this particular seller. This buyer is relying on the seller. It's considered to be a transaction that's actually going to happen. And the person has no intention of retracting. And therefore, in such a situation, once the lokeach shows that he has no intention of retracting, at that point in time, if the seller does retract, so then you can curse him with the curse of the mishapara. And then the Gemara said, now that you already said the whole point of him showing up at the granary is that the seller relies on him, so even if he doesn't show up at the granary, let's say he just finds him in the marketplace after some time, and he says to him, I'm relying on you, at that point in time there will be a mishapara. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Samar of Nachman says, Klola de Revisa, the general rule when it comes to ribis, when it comes to interest, Kol agar notar le aser. Anytime that he's paying him for the delay in collection, so then we say that's going to be forbidden. Meaning to say, if the person who gives the money, when the lender gives the money to the borrower, he's charging the borrower extra because he's not demanding the money right now, he's allowing him to hold that debt for some time and he's going to collect later, that's what makes it usher, that's what's considered to be interest. And the Gemara continues, V'yamar Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman says, Haiman deyoiv zuze lakira, if somebody is giving money for kira, which is loaves of wax, v'ka'azli dalid dalid, and let's say the going rate is you get 4 loaves for every dinar that you give, V'yamar lein, he says to him, Yahivna lach, hey, I'm going to give you 5 for every dinar instead of 4, meaning to say if you pay me in advance, I'm going to give you a little more, so that could be a potential issue of ribis, of interest. So it depends, isnu gabe, so if he actually has the loaves of wax, so shari, then it's permitted, because the seller has them with him at that time, so it's almost as if the sale is completed. But lesnu gabe, but if he doesn't have the wax with him, it's not in his possession, so then also then it's considered to be forbidden, because again, in that situation, what we're essentially saying is it's like he's lending him the money in advance, and for that reason he's giving him a little bit extra loaves of wax, is essentially giving him an interest. The Gemara says, Pshita, well, isn't that obvious? Of course it's interest. And the Gemara says, Lo no tzrich, it's necessary, de islay ashroi b'masa, because the seller has credit in the city, meaning it's easily accessible for him to get the loaves of wax, because he's owed, he has a certain amount of credit, he has a certain amount of credit with other sellers in the city. Ma'u detema, what might you have said, Kevin de islay ashroi b'masa, since he has credit in the city, kad shiyavo b'nio ad shem samaftech dami. So that's like a loan where the borrower says, I really have the funds to be able to pay it. I could pay it immediately. I'm just waiting for my son to come, or I'm waiting for the key. That's generally considered okay. So kamash malon, so that's what it's coming to teach. That over here, Kevin the mechasri guvaina, just because he has it on credit, but since he hasn't actually collected it, command the less no dummy, it's as if he doesn't have it, and therefore it is a problem. And Rashi explains agar noterle, which means again schar hamtana means payment for the delay. Let's say you have a situation of a sale, so if the lokach advanced the money to the mocher, and so then the mocher says, I'm going to give a little bit extra, that's a schar hamtana. Imozel gabe mishum hamtana, if essentially the seller said to the buyer, you can buy it for a little cheaper because of the fact that there's a delay, I'm not going to give you the items right away. Shamakdim lo hamos, again the buyer advances the money, v'hamekach ein lo lamocher achshav, and the actual item that's being purchased, the seller doesn't have it right now, so that's agar noterle, that's going to be a problem of ribis. Lakira, and so then we said, for example, mocher shava, let's say somebody who's selling wax, if the going rate is dalid chalos shava bezuzah, it's 4 loaves of wax for 1 zuz, and then he says, Yahivna lach, hey, I'm going to give you I'll give you 5 loaves of wax for a zuz, lizman ploni, at a certain point in time, meaning you're essentially going to advance me the money, and for that I'm going to give you a little extra. V'hiktim lo hamos, actually he gives him the money now, so then that's going to depend whether the seller actually has the loaves of wax in his possession. Isnu im biyado, meaning if it's in his possession, aval einam be'iro avad hamafteach v'udachag lamos, but let's say it's in his possession, but it's not in the city right now, he lost the key, he needs money, so then shari it's permitted. The havile halveni ad shiyava b'ni, that's already the equivalent of when a person says, lend me money until my son comes. The Tanan b'masisim, we learned in the Mishnah further on, the mutter, that's mutter. So then the Gemara said, that's why over here the case is, the islay ashroi b'masa, the seller has credit in the city. Hamocher azeh afu nasan mos, this seller also, he already gave money to other people. Upasakim acher mal shav, and he already made deals with them for the wax, and so therefore you might say that also it's considered as though it's in his possession, and that's what we're saying over here, it's not considered to be in his possession. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. V'yamar Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman says, Haiman de ozif pshite mechavre, if somebody is borrowing money from his friend, v'yashkach betufain, and then he finds that he got a little extra money, more than he was originally considering borrowing, if the amount that he found extra is an amount that would make sense that the lender just made a mistake, he accidentally gave him a little extra money, so then so then the borrower has to return that extra money. And if not, then the borrower can assume that the lender was just throwing in a little extra as a gift, and he doesn't have to return that extra. And the Gemara says, what does it mean that he finds a certain amount of money that it can be assumed that it was just a mistake? Amar Ravacha, brother of Yosef, Ravacha, the son of Rav Yosef, says, and Rashi explains, Ve'eshkach tufaina means to say, Zeh shekibel hamos, this person who received the money, Matzah b'hen yoser, mimah shamar lo chaveru, he finds it's a little more money than the person who was lending the money actually said he was going to lend to him. Ibechdei shadas to, again, if it's something that it could be understood that it's a mistake. The ikol amemar toh hamalva b'cheshbon, you could say that the lender made a mistake in the calculation. V'lo yodaben, he didn't realize he gave extra, so then chayev zelach sirolo, so then the borrower has to return that to him, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Dalid Amud Aleph.